I just want to start by saying that the book is so ambitious and rich and thought-provoking that I'm sure that there's so many layers and so much we can talk about. And we'll see how much we can get to before the Q&A is jumping at us, or the chat room, and other people want to jump in. But Gail, I want to just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about Gail the Writer. When did you start realizing that you were an author? What brought you to this spot?
My life as a fiction writer, I think, emerged from my teaching career at Sheridan College, where I developed and taught courses in immigration and multicultural literature, drawing on the absolutely astounding contributions that immigrants have made to Canadian lit. And as I became familiar with writers like Rohinton Mistry, Michael Ondaatje, Dion Brand, David Basmalgis, Shyam Salvadore, it occurred to me that living in Canada and living at a distance from your country of origin and your family of origin just might provide the mental space to really begin to explore one's past in a much more creative way than you might if you were on the scene all the time with them. So, of course, my experience as a white English-speaking American immigrant to Canada was completely different from those writers who faced, of course, racial discrimination and all kinds of barriers that I didn't face. Still, I really thought that the sense of being in between cultures seemed to spark a creative urge in these writers, which, they just seemed to flourish in this duality. And so I began to wonder, maybe I could do that, maybe. And around 2010, I began to take courses at Ryerson, thanks to the generosity of my lovely, supportive husband, Meyer. And then I went on to study with Wei-Sun Choi at the Humber School for Writers. And I remember what Wei-Sun used to do. He called each person in his writing workshop into his office, and he sat you down, and he presented us all with origami butterflies. And then I remember he looked me in the eye and he said, "Gail, you are a writer." And I really, I am, right? And I thought maybe he's got something there. And so, 10 years later, I get it. Maybe I am. That's really where it began. So I'm very happy to have had those experiences, especially with Wei-Sun.
Wow, that's great. Gail, you are a writer. I've written a book before this that and had published that many, I'm sure, if not all of us, have read, The Girl Who Was Born That Way.
Yep.
And we met the Berk family in that book, and had to, live through the tragedy of Terry Sue. But did you know this book was going to come while you were writing that one? Did this book start percolating while you were writing the first book, or how did it come to be?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I don't think that the second book was percolating as I wrote the first, but certainly I thought of Memory's Shadow as a sequel to The Girl Who Was Born That Way. And I knew when I completed that first book, I wasn't really finished with that Berk family. In fact, I felt in some ways I was just getting started with them. But I didn't have a plan about what would happen next. Not a clue, actually. But I was interested in broadening the time horizon to see how these characters might develop after the death of Terry Sue. So my starting question was actually, what if these three Berk sisters grew apart from each other, as they aged, as they matured? And what if one or two of them actually tried to break loose from this, really tightly knit, internally focused family and started to engage in the larger world swirling around them? How might that change their relationship, and what would it look like? So that's kind of where I began. And when I finished the manuscript for Memory's Shadow, I stepped back from it and I saw that, in fact, the second novella was not necessarily a sequel to the first. I thought it would be, but I'm not sure that it has to be. Memory's Shadow continues that Berk story, but I do think it stands on its own. And it's much more global in scope. It's more politically aware than the first book. And it's true that the deceased sister, Terry Sue, appears at the beginning of Memory's Shadow, but I don't really think you need to know how she died or what her condition was to understand Memory's Shadow, because it's really, and I guess this is one of the themes of the second book, it's the memory of Terry Sue that's important, and the way that her shadow really hangs over the lives of the sisters that counts. So I also didn't know when I began to write Memory's Shadow that I would actually interweave some of those bigger traumatic historical events into the plot of the book, like the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe or Hiroshima. And those inclusions were really, I think, intuitive leaps that emerged through the writing process more than anything else. I didn't have an outline or a plan, really.
Wow.
I know that's a bit crazy, but it's true.
No. Amazing. It's amazing without a plan that you were able to create such a broad story, that the story is so far-reaching in so many ways. And I really want to talk some more about the sisters. But before we get to the sisters and their really interesting relationship with each other, yes. Your attention to detail in terms of both time and place, the things going on around, the connections to who's the president at the time, and Jimmy Carter being a farmer, and just all of those details. And then also the details about place, the place names. Have you traveled to these places? Were you an armchair traveler, or did you actually really know Poland and Japan? I mean, we know you're from St. Louis, but did you also know, how did you know Poland and Japan?
Well, first of all, Helen, I'm pleased that the contextual details seem credible to you, because, a writer never knows, you don't, so it's good to hear that. And I have traveled in Poland and Japan, but not on a specific research trip for this novel. The scenes in Memory's Shadow, which are rooted in those travel experiences, don't really mirror what happened in those places. I repurposed my travel experiences and I made some big changes. And I suppose, in a way, that's why fiction is so much more liberating than writing a memoir. I didn't have to stick to a script. I wasn't obliged to tell the truth. I could just make it up as I went, and pretty much that's what I did. So I drew on my travel experiences, but, not specifically. But I'll tell you where I do think that the armchair research comes into play. It's actually on Pruitt-Igoe, because I had left St. Louis by the 1970s. And when the demolition of that housing complex occurred, I was long gone. And yet I did feel, as I look back at the history of that period, I had to include it in this book. Those 33 buildings going down, they were going to be there. They just had to be, because it was such a defining moment in the development of St. Louis, which is almost a character in the book. And the impact of the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe was felt well beyond Missouri. Pruitt-Igoe at that time was the largest housing complex in the U.S., and the demolition was covered on the national news, and I think that is in the book. And of course, Tony, being Tony, this astute character, politically with it, certainly would have known about the demolition of Pruitt-Igoe. And I can say I think she would have an opinion about it, because she had an opinion about everything. What didn't she know, right? So I felt it had to be there. But I also used Pruitt-Igoe to foreshadow the violence that erupts later in the novel at the elementary school where Linda Sue teaches. And, that catastrophic destruction of the African-American community at Pruitt-Igoe, I thought was vital to my story about a family of Holocaust survivors who also had faced loss of community, segregation into ghettos, and brutal racism. So I wouldn't say they had the same, it's not the same experience, but it was kind of used, Pruitt-Igoe was used to foreshadow that kind of violence. And then, of course, the fate of Pruitt-Igoe also heightened the conflict between these three sisters, which is really the beating heart of the book. So.
Yeah. Let's talk about the sisters for a few minutes. Oh, before we start that, I just wanted to say that I feel the book stands alone completely.
Oh,
it's
good.
just, I just personally remembered the Berks, but I really completely agree with you that the book is a standalone, and you don't need to have read the first book, which is a very intimate book. It's a very different book from this.
Very different, yeah.
But I'd really like to talk about the sisters. I want to ask you why you feel Pruitt-Igoe is so important to the three of them. But the first thing I want to ask you about is one of the elements of the book that I found so disturbing is that Hetty doesn't tell Tony that their father has died. And for me, I mean, that it isn't at the beginning of the book at all. And I've had all kinds of feelings about the sisters by then, but it shocked me so much. And I thought, I don't really understand these sisters. This is the indicator to me that I haven't figured them out. Like, I know that sometimes they're jealous of each other, and I know that they sometimes are dismissive, but they're also very loving. So how could that have happened? So can you talk to us a little bit about the sisters? I find them so interesting.
Okay, sure. I mean, they have a really strange disconnection between the three of them. And I think it partly grows out of the fact that they're such different individuals. They differ on values, they differ on politics, attitudes toward family. I mean, they're shocked that Tilia Tony would want to have a child without a husband. Oh my God, a shunda, a shame in the family. And Hetty is the practical one here. And she's materialistic, she's conservative, she's a real estate agent. And then Tony, this academic, she's so politically engaged, firebrand, pushing those hot buttons with her sisters at every chance she gets. She's really the queen bee. And then Linda Sue is the innocent, the soft, gentle elementary school teacher, such a nurturing soul. So, I think there's a sense at throughout the novel that these are really very different characters. And, I read a great line from Toni Morrison about sisters. And I thought it really helped explain this strained relationship with these three sisters. So Toni Morrison said, "A sister can be seen as someone who is both ourselves and very much not ourselves, a special kind of double." She's really brilliant. Toni Morrison is really brilliant. So that double-edged experience of sisters is really one of the themes, I guess, that I investigated and that runs through the novel. Hetty and Linda Sue don't contact Tony in Japan when the father dies, because for most of the story, Tony is, she puts up this boundary between herself and her sisters. She regards her political sisterhood, who participate in the Equal Rights Amendment movement, as much more important and essential than her sisters, her sibs. And she's so dismissive of them, of their mundane parochial life in U City. And she's really made herself an outsider in this family. In the beginning, when she tries to go back to St. Louis, can't go home again. And my God, you can't get downtown by yourselves. What's going on here? So I think that Linda Sue, I know is furious that Tony didn't tell her about the death of their brother in Poland. And
Right.
I think that Hetty, is just so angry at all the kind of superiority that Tony really lords over them. So that when the father dies, I think there's just a bit of a resentment and a bit of payback. You left, and that's your problem, kind of thing.
Yeah, your choice to be in Japan. We didn't tell you to go to Japan.
We don't even know where you are in Japan. Oh, you left your number, but so I think that they take revenge in a small way, and they exclude her from this really significant moment in the life of their family. I know it's harsh, but I think it does reflect kind of the conflict, the depth of the conflict between these sisters. So
I agree. The fact that it is harsh, I think what I was saying is the fact that it sort of like shocked me. It made me even think even more about their relationship. Because at first I felt that they were just kind of almost generationally different, because they each kind of represented a conservative to very liberal, I suppose, to someone that hasn't completely bloomed yet, like there were all these different kinds of spaces. But after that, I saw them a little differently. I saw their interactions in a different way. Can we talk a little bit about why Linda Sue has to go to Poland? Why is the Berk family history so important to her?
Great question. She certainly is obsessed with gaining information about the Berks, who were, of course, the Berkowitzes in Poland. And, that gap in the information about their family just gnaws at her. And then Josh has the same feeling, his third generation. Yeah. So, their blank history is kind of the elephant in the room. And it's just a piece of that Berk puzzle that's missing. And when you think about it, it would be perplexing. I mean, after all, only 900 people survived the Lodz ghetto out of 230,900, and these 4 people survived. It's a miracle. You'd want to know that. And of course, when Linda Sue and Josh finally do make their way to Poland, they have this shocking discovery that there was a brother, Yeshua, who perished. And Linda Sue and Josh just feel absolutely devastated and betrayed and saddened by the silence that has surrounded this brother's short life. I mean, it would have been Linda Sue's brother, but Josh is carrying his name.
Yes.
He doesn't even know that. So, I mean, that's incredible in a way. But why did the mother, father, and the two older sisters conspire to keep the death of this child a secret? And I don't have a definitive answer about that, because I think silence and secrets in Holocaust families, in all families really, is just a very complex question. We do know that the children of survivors sometimes face a wall of silence. Some survivors did not talk to their children about what they had experienced. Others absolutely did. Some children did not ask. Others, like Linda Sue and Josh, asked, but they were unable, the family was unable or unwilling to speak about these horrors, thus creating this mystery that Linda Sue and Josh really felt compelled to solve. So in the book, I really wanted to show this pattern of silence in the Berk family, and I wanted to show how it functioned like a kind of tacit agreement to hide the trauma that they experienced, and they went to great lengths to disconnect it from the family life. Why? Well, there's so many reasons why. I guess they needed to forget in order to adapt to their new lives. They wanted to protect the younger children and their grandchildren. But whatever the reason, Linda Sue and Josh are caught in this web of silence. And I think the important point is they never do learn the full story. We never learn the full story.
Yeah.
And that, I think, raises some very important issues and questions, because it makes me think about what's the function of silence? Is it withholding the truth? Is it an act of denial? Or is it a private way of remembering and grieving? Are the parents and older sibs obliged to tell them everything? And I think in the end, maybe their silence and secrets need to be accepted rather than challenged. And that's really why it's there. Maybe we just let it be. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, it was so interesting just now when you were talking about the fact that that there's some sort of complicity in the silence. And it made me think about the journals, because in a way, the sisters continue the family tradition of silence by writing their deepest thoughts in their journals rather than sharing them with each other. And even when Toni has an opportunity to read Linda Sue's journal, she doesn't do it. And I found those, I hadn't thought of it in connection with what you had just said until you just said it now, that the journals continue. They continue having a public face and a private face, and a private story you don't share with each other.
Yeah. You know, until you actually said that, I hadn't thought about what you said. It hadn't occurred to me. I guess I thought, you know, that there really wasn't sufficient trust and intimacy between these sisters to warrant sharing these journals. And then that had never been the plan. Toni had constructed this whole exercise in journal writing so that in the end, she could donate the journals to an archive, and somebody would write a great doctoral thesis about, you know, survivors' children. So the value of the journals from Toni's perspective was also, it was academic.
Yes.
It wasn't personal at all. And when in the end of the book, Toni actually decides to not read all of Linda Sue's diary, which she could have at that point, it was in a drawer, she had found it. I see her pivoting away from seeing her family in these academic terms, instrumental terms, and, you know, moving away from seeing this as a case study, you know, in a Holocaust family. And finally, she seems able to see her sister as worthy of privacy and respect. But of course, it comes too late, because by that time, Linda Sue is gone. So
that's so interesting. Yeah, I see that. I see that just now when you're saying it, that is a development, because Toni is so rigid, not so much in her opinion, in her person. You know, it's so much more important for her to be in the world of ideas than in the world of feelings. And you know, we see that change over time with her. So it's interesting. Linda Sue's death, that we, of course, comes as such a horrible, violent shock, and it's not the first time we see violence in the book. You know, although it's the first time that it's that present, like the first of all the sounds that she hears, and then that image, the visual image of Hetty seeing the blood. Yeah. But you know, it resonates with the other images, which of course were much broader, but of what happened in the ghetto and from Lodz and Hiroshima. And I'd like to ask you a little bit about what you're saying about evil in this book. Should we just expect it to keep going?
Well, I do think that there's a preoccupation with violence in the book. And I think that can be considered a manifestation of, you know, the universality and the particularity of evil. It especially resonates for me in St. Louis, in the St. Louis setting, because St. Louis is a place with a troubled and very violent history, which I didn't understand when I grew up there, but now more than a half a century later, I have a better idea of what happened then, and unfortunately continues to happen in St. Louis. So though the school shooting is jarring in Memory Shadow, and it comes as a shock, I agree with you about that, I felt that it had to be there because I thought it showed something that I feel very strongly about, which is the ubiquity of violence on the American scene. And St. Louis really epitomizes that. I mean, Michael Brown and whatever else came after. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't remember the tenements. You know, I mean, I was certainly an adult then. I should have known about them, but I guess St. Louis wasn't on the map for me then. So I found all of that extremely interesting. You had mentioned a few minutes ago when we were talking about Josh that, you know, it's shocking for him to find out that he's named for this brother that they didn't even know existed. And also, you know, he does the trip and then to Poland and then he, in the end, is responsible for that amazing photography. So do you see Josh, I find Josh is an interesting kind of almost central figure, even though the book's not about him, but do you see him as potentially hope for the future, that there's something that can get resolved because he's trying to connect the past to the future and using the photography to do that?
You're right on about that. I mean, Josh was intended to really represent the outlook of the grandchildren of survivors, the third generation. And I definitely wanted his photography and his engagement with art to be there because I felt, and maybe this is true of the third generation, that he was really trying to convert these old wounds by making them into something beautiful and meaningful. So, you know, it's a shift in perspective. Instead of looking at the Shoah in very melancholic ways, I thought that what Josh was trying to do was to make the Holocaust more of a usable tool and for understanding and for stopping that perpetuation of victimhood that, you know, was, I think, much more part of an earlier understanding of the Holocaust. So I do see great hope coming out of Josh. I mean, he's a talented artist. Why not?
I don't know if it's ironic or just evident of how well you've developed each of these characters, but I just wrote down that Hetty, when she's discussing the Holocaust survivors video archive, doesn't recognize what Josh is doing. And she says, you in this memory business, what difference do any of our memories make anyway? Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's that great line. And also, I just wanted to mention a couple of words about memory because I want to ask you about the title, which I think is brilliant. And they each talk about memory in a different way. Tony says to Caswell, where I come from, memory defines us. It's who we are. It's what holds us together. She's trying to understand his separation from it. And she's finally recognizing how important it is. And Linda Sue says that such poignantly sad thing in advance of her own death. If her life ended tomorrow, she feared the memory of the Berk family would be obliterated twice. And the final quote that I wrote down is, Caswell's, some memories / like putting on / dirty socks.
Right. Only somebody Japanese could say that, right?
It's so wonderful.
So wonderful.
He agrees. Tony agrees, right? Like she says, like, I can't remember exactly. She says something like right on, or I don't know. I can't remember exactly what she said. There's a lot of different attitudes to memory here. Like they're not consistent. Like Hetty says, leave it alone. Linda Sue saying, I'm the only one who can be responsible. Tony says it defines us. And Caswell says it's dirty socks. So where do you come out on that, Gail?
Well, I guess I'm trying to cover all the bases in a way, but I chose the title because I really wanted to explore in the book the way traumatic events impact on us and how such events continue to haunt us long after they've occurred. So, you know, that gets you into memory, because memory is the vehicle that allows you to represent the past to yourself and to other people. And I do believe that memory does shape us and define us, as Tony says to Kazuo in Japan. And it's interesting because memory is it's so fragmentary and incomplete and murky and unpleasant, like dirty socks. And yet it's our way of really connecting the past and the future. So I think that it's really it's essential in human understanding.
So is the murkiness part of what is the shadow? Is it that it's there, but it's not there in all its detail? Is that what you're getting at with the shadow?
Yes, absolutely. And it's dark.
It's dark.
Yeah.
Wow. So much to think about, Gail. I loved your statement and your acknowledgements that your grandkids, I don't know, I didn't write it down, so I'm hoping I got it right, give you the reason to get up each morning and write, which I thought was so amazing. So what are you working on now? And what are you going to work on next?
It's good. It's a good question. Right now, I'm just working on getting Memory Shadow launched out into the bigger world. And I'm thinking about what's next. You know, where are these Berks now? I've got to call them up and ask them, right? What are they doing, right?
Josh.
Yeah. Yeah. Where is he?
Josh is doing.
Yeah. So, maybe, I'll come back to them. I'm not sure yet, really, but it's a great question, Helen.
Thank you. We'll be looking forward to either them or anybody else who want us to learn about and engage with and meet and understand the world through their eyes a little. So thank you so much.